the tragedy of Hurricane Harvey has told us a lot about the nation, told us a lot about Houston, told us a lot maybe we didn't want to be reminded of about the administration currently in power in the White House. And here to talk about that with us now is Cristina López. Cristina is a senior researcher at Media Matters for America. She has a graduate degree in public policy from Georgetown University, and she, along with the rest of the Media Matters team, has been tracking Mike Pence, among others. First of all, Cristina, thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Secondly, oh, absolutely. And secondly, I guess I was struck by something that you guys put out recently. It was about an interview that Mike Pence did with someone named Michael Berry. And this was in the wake, or this was during the height of Harvey, Hurricane Harvey. So Mike Pence decided, the Vice President of the United States, of course, decided to give an interview to a radio outlet and a radio host, and this is the one he chose. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about Michael Berry. Who is he, and what should we know about him?
So yeah, let's start with a little background on why this is wildly problematic. Mike Pence, as you know, has been appearing lately on different radio programs in the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey, you know, as part of the ongoing efforts to mitigate its results, representing the administration, basically. And one of the shows that he went on was Michael Berry, who is a radio host in Texas that we have been tracking for a long time, and this is why we know about all of his problematic record. He's notorious for mocking black victims of violence in Chicago, and has, you know, made over the years a lot of really racist comments. So it's not only a lack of foresight by the administration of, you know, just not being able to see how these actions are perceived. It's also, you know, lending some credibility to a person that not even like Chicago radio stations wanted to give a prize to after he mocked black victims of gun violence. So you just see, and when it comes to the administration, that there's not a lot of care in terms of where they decide to go to amplify their messages and who they want to legitimize with their appearances.
So, Cristina, is it that there's not a lot of care in who they go to, or are they in some way sympathetic to these people, or can we even know what's provoking them? I mean, it really bothers me a lot that the vice president, we know, well, I'm not going to speak for you, Donald Trump is what he is, and it's pretty horrible, but everybody keeps putting up, not everybody, people in Washington, D.C. sometimes tend to put up Mike Pence as well. You know, he's sensible, he's reasonable, he's responsible. But to me, when you go on a radio show of a guy who said that African-American students at UCLA are quote-unquote pack animals who need to get the F over themselves, who said about a mosque in New York City, I hope somebody blows it up, a proposed mosque, I hope somebody blows it up, which is advocating terrorism, who says guns don't kill people, Muslims do, which means he's not paying attention to the nature, the victims of gun violence and who they really are, or the perpetrators in this country. It all says to me that at the very least we have not just a president, but a vice president and an administration that's willing to give a spotlight to these people, either doesn't care or agrees with them. What do you think?
So that's very important, because as you can see, there is pretty much, when it comes to policy differences, there are none between the president and vice president. And in this case, when it came to, you know, going to radio stations and deciding where they wanted to amplify their messages and you know, the aftermath of Harvey, the choice the vice president made was to go to Michael Berry, who we have mentioned his problematic record, and Rush Limbaugh. And, you know, it's especially offensive that he picked Rush Limbaugh as, you know, the the show to go on, where it's a show where periodically you have climate change denialism, you have science denialism, and considering that Harvey is a tragedy that was, majorly impacted by man-made climate change, it's just problematic. It sends a message that, as much as the administration is trying to be there for victims, it's just, sends a message that media-wise we need to pay attention to.
Well, and not only that, I think that's a great point. I want to get back to it, but speaking of racism, Rush Limbaugh is the guy who said to an African-American phone caller, "Take that bone out of your nose and call me back." I mean, this is a guy so racist, so offensive. He said the NAACP should have riot rehearsals. They should get a liquor store and practice robberies. This is a guy so vile in his expressions of racism that he makes Michael Berry almost look reasonable. This is who the vice president chooses to go to when there are so many legitimate outlets in the Texas area that he could have chosen. To me, this is deeply, deeply, deeply disturbing. Am I overreacting?
I don't think you are at all. We agree that it's a bad choice, and it looks bad, especially considering this is a hurricane that affected all the population in Houston, and a lot of the population in other counties in Texas. It didn't just affect their base, and to just think that you can just dedicate to your efforts in a couple just right-wing radio stations, it's not like you're trying to amplify your message to, a larger audience. It's also a problem that Rush Limbaugh doesn't have a great relationship with. As you said, he has a horrible record when it comes to racist statements. And we have been tracking him for a while, but also just to put it in the context of why it was especially bad to pick this show as a place to go on in the aftermath of a hurricane, we can only backtrack and check what Rush Limbaugh has said in the aftermath of hurricanes. And he referred to the victims of Hurricane Katrina as just liberals who were on welfare and that lacked self-reliance, pretty much blaming them for their tragedy. He compared the disaster to a reality show, and we can add to the insensitive remarks that he's had about just victims of hurricanes in general. He accused the victims of, waving guns at helicopters, saying that they were shooting cops, that they were raping people on the street. And, if you remember that many of the victims of Hurricane Katrina were African Americans and people of color. So obviously these statements were racially charged. And so if you look at that record and you see that Michael Pence would choose this show as the one that he would want to appear on in the aftermath of a hurricane, it's just problematic because he's legitimizing it, the statements that Rush Limbaugh has said in the past, and pretty much sanitizing his record and the way that he's referred to minorities of color in this country.
Right, and when you think about the fact that so many of those victims of Hurricane Harvey are people of color, it must be, dispiriting to say the least to think that the leaders of your country care so little about you. You made, Cristina López of Media Matters, you made a great point a couple minutes ago I want to go back to, which is you pointed out that these radio hosts, I don't know Rush's record on climate change, but I'll bet he's not a big acceptor of climate science. And you mentioned that Michael Berry, who's elevated by the vice president, honored by the vice president of the United States, coming on his show. I guess he's something of a climate denier, right?
Of course, and it's what stands out is the racist videos that he's posted on his show's YouTube channel, where he has referred to African Americans as jungle animals, as pack animals. And the thing is, the White House has posted publicly the list of transcripts of the vice president's radio appearances, meaning that there is no shame in legitimizing these characters that belong in the fringe and should remain in the fringe. You're pretty much elevating them with the power of the vice presidency.
So is there anything that people can do about that? I mean, you know, it's so frustrating when you hear about these awful, I mean, look, they're awful human beings. I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. They're morally monstrous individuals as far as I'm concerned. Rush Limbaugh has been prominent for quite some time. But this Michael Berry guy doesn't get quite as much national attention. He just got lifted up by Mike Pence. Is there anything people can do, or do we just have to sit and watch the Vice President of the United States cast a spotlight on a horrible person?
Well, I think a good first step is information, like knowing who these characters are, knowing what they've said in the past, knowing why the vice president appearing on their shows and legitimizing them raises concerns, and why is it's alarming that they're using the office of the vice presidency to legitimize people that have made such problematic statements in the past. I think the first step is, you know, to be informed, and then, you know, there's so many things that can be done either through social media or through directing attention to the administration's actions. Now, since we're talking in the aftermath of a tragedy, I think with regards to that, the sensible thing to do is to seek ways of helping the victims, which, you know, are in a lot of need right now.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to bring it back down to earth by talking about the fact that a lot of people are still in need. There are good progressive websites out there providing guidance on where you can contribute, where your money will be used most effectively and most fairly. So I think, and we'll be talking more about that on this show, about ways you can contribute and places you can contribute as an individual to helping the people of Hurricane Harvey. And I guess I would only add, Cristina López, and then I'll give you the last word, but I guess I would only add that I also feel that as so many of us out there say our little prayers morning and night, or do whatever rituals we do to bring forward the impeachment of Donald Trump, that we also remember that Michael Pence is a pretty ghastly human being as well. We hope that whatever sweeps Donald Trump from office will take Mike Pence as well. That's my personal editorialization, but I'll give you the last word.
Well, I think it's, you said it earlier, I think it's very important to look at what Mike Pence is doing. As we know, there are very little differences policy-wise, and when it comes to the media choices that the administration makes, and when it comes to which shows they decide to elevate, it doesn't matter whether it's the president or the vice president. The administration acts as a whole in that regard, and like the fact that they are only going to conservative shows in the aftermath of a tragedy that affected everyone shows that they won't stop when it comes to politicizing, and they won't stop with tragedies if they can use them to feed their base and benefit from it electorally. So we are, on our part, MediaMatters.org, we are keeping track of these media choices that the administration is making, and your audience can go to MediaMatters.org to look at the records, and we've been keeping tabs on most of these radio hosts for a while, so we have the receipts. We can show what they've done.
Yeah, and I think that's important work. I don't know how you do it day after day, diving into this stuff, but thanks for doing it. And Cristina López, senior researcher with Media Matters for America, thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me. Have a good one.